Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Reform Dallas Election Series. My name is Barry Jacobs, and with me is Nancy Rodriguez. We will be your moderators tonight.
Hello, and welcome to the forum. We also want to introduce Soraya Santos and Millie Domenech and Aaron Moore, who will be helping us with timekeeping and technical duties. Reform Dallas is an informal organization of Dallasites committed to honest and transparent local government. You may be one of the 12,000 members of our Reform Dallas Facebook group. If not, we'd love for you to join us. We also offer independent journalism on the web, where you'll also find the city's very best guide to our municipal elections. Check it out at reformdallas.io. That's reformdallas.io. Reform Dallas does not make candidate endorsements, although our members have opinions like everyone else. The point of these forums is to let the candidates speak to all of us and take their best shot at earning our vote. We want this to be a fair and illuminating experience for everyone here.
Thanks, Nancy. We'll have two segments tonight. In the first segment, each candidate gets a short intro. Then we'll move on to prepared questions that each candidate will answer. For the second segment, we'll open up for audience questions, so stick around for that. Please submit your questions to Millie Domenech in the Zoom chat panel anytime, and we'll try to call on as many people as we possibly can in the second segment to pose your question to candidates. Please keep your questions very short and concise so that we can get as many folks in as we possibly can. One last thing, we will publish the recorded forums on our website and in the Facebook group. So by participating tonight, you expressly give us permission to do that. And with that, here are your candidates in District 14. David Blewett and Paul Ridley have graciously joined us tonight. Thank you, gentlemen. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Elizabeth Viney had a previously scheduled event, but she tells us that she intends to join a little bit later. So when she joins, our question time will get a little bit shorter, but for right now, we have 2 minutes.
Okay, so we'll give you 2 minutes for your answers. And Mr. Ridley, you have 2 minutes to tell us who you are and why we should want to vote for you.
All right, Nancy. First of all, thank you to Reform Dallas and our moderators tonight for hosting this online forum to allow the viewers to get to know the candidates a little better. I have decided to run for the council seat in District 14 because I want to make Dallas better. That's the theme of my campaign. There are a lot of good things going on in Dallas, but there are a lot of things that we could improve upon. Some of my priorities include protecting our neighborhoods from undesirable development, protecting our neighborhood parks from over-commercialization and overdevelopment. Also, to promote affordable workforce housing. Because of the rapidly rising real estate values in Dallas, we have an affordability housing problem. I also believe that we need sensible economic development that generates good paying jobs, particularly for those sectors of the city that are experiencing high unemployment rates. I'm also firmly committed to mitigating climate change and air and water pollution, to developing a more resilient and sustainable city infrastructure, to promoting and improving the quality of life in our neighborhoods through good urban design, walkability, and enhanced green space. And also, very importantly, to open, transparent, and equitable city government. Those are my principles. I have experience working on city commissions for 12 years, the Landmark Commission, Preserving Our Historic Neighborhoods, and the Plan Commission for 8 years. I know how City Hall works. I know a lot of the leaders of the departments, the staff at City Hall, and I also know leaders in neighborhoods in District 14.
Mr. Ridley, your time is up.
That's critical.
Thanks, Paul. Your time is up. David, let's move on to you. You've got 2 minutes. Tell us why we should reelect you.
2 minutes. Well, thankfully, I know a little bit about you guys. I've been on with you before, so I'll say hi to some old friends. And I will also shamelessly do a plug to Stephen Wallard, who, quite frankly, I met during the campaign 2 years ago. He was wearing a shirt for my rival, Kingston, and I was wearing a Blewett shirt. And we actually got to know each other a little bit. And he goes, you know what, look, you win. I'll be with you if you're on the right side of the issues. And I respect that mindset. I respect how he was open-minded and gave me a chance. And it was him and a handful of others on this, in this group, that did give me a chance to earn your trust and to earn this job. Because let's be clear, you guys were on the other side last time, and I know that, but I kept coming, didn't I? So my name is David Blewett. I live in East Dallas. I've got 7 kids. I've lived in the district for 30 odd years, going back to when I first got out of college. I lived in some terrible apartments over where Central Market is now, the Villa, if you guys can believe it. My mom thought it was hilarious. The Villa on Lover's Lane, a lot of cockroaches. Lived over in Knox Henderson for a while, rented a house in the M Streets, bought a house in the M Streets, and then this is my 4th house. I live in Lakewood Heights. Involved in a variety of neighborhood issues on Crime Watch and school-oriented issues because I have so many kids. Got involved in politics a little bit in 2013. I ran when Angela Hunt termed out, and learned a lot about politics during that race. And yeah, Philip Kingston won back then. And I thought I was done, but here we are. So 2019, I ran, I won. I've done the job for 2 years. I think I've proven myself. I will stack my record up of what I've done and reaching out to all neighbors all throughout the district. I've been very open and transparent and respectful of every view. And that is a mark of what I plan on doing for the next 2 years as well. So I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm happy that Mr. Ridley is here tonight. We'll do this again. I'm sure we'll do it a few more times, but let's get to the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, that's your time. Perfect timing.
Yeah, I nailed it. Such a deal.
Thanks, candidates. We're going to move on to the questions. Here are the ground rules. Nancy or I will ask a question. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to respond. Again, when your time is up, Ms. Moore will stop you. If one of us feels that one of your answers needs a follow-up, we'll ask the question. We'll give you both a reasonable amount of time to respond. We're interested in your ideas. We want to know how you'll approach the job. So let's get started. The first question is on public safety. And David, you'll take this one first, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Back the blue, defend the police, fund the communities, reimagine public safety. There are any number of slogans that all speak to one core sentiment. Many people in Dallas feel that we need a new approach to addressing crime and inequality in our neighborhoods. What are your specific budget priorities for public safety? And what changes would you propose and how will those ideas improve public safety in District 14 and all of Dallas?
All right. I need more than 2 minutes. The budget aspect of public safety is tough. I mean, a lot of people want to talk about how we should just hire a whole bunch of officers and somehow or other that'll solve our problem. I look at it differently. I look at it as when you call 911, you want an officer. That's just the way it is. And if you go down and look at what we've done in 911 in the call center, we have funded it, but we haven't staffed it. We're funded for about 100 people down there. We have about 70. It's a civil service position. I've been down there a number of times. I call into the 911 call center on Saturday nights when street racers are going crazy just to see what the wait times are and find out why people aren't picking up the phone and getting an officer out to you, whatever it is your problem. So I have focused quite a bit on staffing up in the 911 call center. The second thing I've focused in on is I do think we ask a lot of our officers, and we're doing more in terms of the right care, which pairs up officers with mental health professionals. So we don't just grab guys that are having challenges and putting them in the system. We actually try and help them. That frees up officers. That is a form of reimagining police, and I don't think anybody's against that. The other thing you think about is we're having a hard time hiring enough officers to do what we're asking them to do. And our training staff, our academies are under 25 per class. We used to do 50 per class. The attrition rate is higher than what our hiring rate is. So it is a challenge to try and do all the work that the officers are trying to do with the manpower that they have. So we've tried to be creative. We've tried to do some things with overtime to try and get some civilianization into the force so we can free up sworn officers to get out on patrol. That's a big part of the budget. It's a big part of what the KPMG study said is we're going to have to be more efficient with our resources. So I pushed very hard on that. I also, quite frankly, it's not public safety, but you have to think about it. I pushed very hard on economic development because if you don't have more tax revenue, you're not going to have the budgeting you want to pay for the things that you need. So economic development is part of public safety.
Hey, David, that's your time. Thanks again. Paul, same question to you. Would you like me to read it to you again, or have you got it?
No, I think I've got it. There are a lot of problems in DPD right now. Retention is low, morale is low, and we have a new police chief. That's not a problem. Hopefully, that is a solution to some of the problems. I think we need to work on retaining officers by paying them competitive salaries. We need to, most importantly, address the problem of the shortfall in the police and fire pension fund. That was addressed, but only on a temporary basis 4 years ago. And it's looming once again with an upcoming deadline for the police. The problem that creates is that you cannot retain particularly young police officers if they have no prospect of a pension that they can rely upon in their later years. But more importantly, we need to go about policing in a more efficient and effective manner. And one of the ways to save millions of dollars from the police budget is to stop arresting people for small drug possession cases. We waste millions of dollars arresting people for a few ounces of marijuana and take police officers off the street to process those arrests, when if we decriminalize that, we could devote that money to solving violent crimes. The other thing that we need to do is to work with our educational institutions to create coursework and counseling for young males not to commit battery against their significant others. That's the other big source of violent crime in the city today. And that's a matter of, one, opportunity for employment so that they don't take their frustrations out on family members, and two, it's educating them and sensitizing them not to batter their significant others. If we make
That's
inroads.
your time, Mr. Ridley.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, so the next question has to do with preservation and gentrification. What will you do to promote preservation of older homes versus tear downs and gentrification that obliterate affordable neighborhoods? And Mr. Ridley, you go first.
All right. Well, this is an important issue in District 14. We do have some affordable neighborhoods left. A lot of our neighborhoods are being subjected to gentrification with tear downs. And with the escalation in real estate values, that's making more neighborhoods less affordable. But there are several things that we can do. First, we must discourage tear downs for high density multifamily developments. That just destabilizes the entire neighborhood and ends up creating a situation where the affordable housing can no longer compete with the brand new luxury high-rise developments. The other thing that we should do is to promote neighborhood stabilization overlays so that we can set up restrictions on tear downs and preserve the existing housing supply. So it's a matter of economics, it's a matter of regulation, and combined with zoning control in those districts so as not to upzone them, that we can control the gentrification trend that we're experiencing now.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. Mr. Blewett, would you like me to repeat the question?
I'll just take a stab at it. So when I think of preservation and gentrification, obviously a lot of our district is made up of older established neighborhoods, some of which already have conservation districts and have done a decent job of protecting from some of the out of control development. But the problem really is that we have an imbalance. We have an imbalance between supply and demand. What's happened is a lot of younger people really want to move into the urban core where a lot of us already live, and there's not enough supply for them. And so into that mix, you've got developers coming in, buying up everything and building whatever they can, and then there is a ready market for them to buy it. Now, just from a basic economic standpoint, the answer is more supply. And what that means is we're gonna have to think more broadly than just District 14 because our land has gotten so expensive, it really is price prohibitive for regular people to buy in. So I'm a big believer in fixing, our permitting office down in Jefferson Avenue, because right now the builders are having a hard time getting permits to build. That's a part of creating more supply. I also push pretty hard on a tax relief program that'll allow seniors to stay in their house. We got briefed on it today. It's going to be a fight. But the idea is that people over the age of 65 can have their city property taxes frozen. And if you do that, it allows people to stay in their homes and not get squeezed out. Because quite frankly, our rising property taxes from values are rapidly playing a role in gentrification in our old neighborhoods. The other thing that I got to touch on, I think I got 10, 20 seconds probably, is I fight very hard against, and I should be careful, ADUs and short-term rentals. Our neighborhoods need to maintain their tranquility, their single-family nature. The idea of kids being able to safely walk through neighborhoods allows people to stay, and that prevents gentrification. That preserves our neighborhoods. So I am not a fan of ADUs out of control, short-term rentals out of control, and I try very hard, I have been trying very hard to come up with a new ordinance to control the short-term rentals, and then the ADU problem issue will be coming after. So all of that's underneath preserving neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is on zoning. David, we'll go back to you for this one. The Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee, the ZOAC, has undertaken a review of our parking codes and is considering eliminating parking minimums altogether. Proponents say this opens up more land for development. Critics say that our code balances uses with parking ratios and that this idea only works in cities with a well-developed public transportation system. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, half of your question, you've already given me the answer. When you start talking about, we don't have a well-developed public transit, and it's really hard to start talking about getting rid of parking if you don't have point-to-point public transit. Ours, we have trains to nowhere, and we made investments decades ago that are costing us today. So public transit is key to this, and we don't have it. I do know there's a big move, and what I've read about it, it looks to me like they're trying to go citywide on reducing parking restrictions for all kinds of commercial categories. I am against that, especially in areas that we have commercial areas touching residential or even within residential. We have a lot of neighborhoods that have commercial within them. So I don't think that works for us. There are areas perhaps that we could do this in a pilot. There are areas that perhaps we could test and see, maybe in the Uptown, maybe along McKinney, maybe some areas that are not like us on the east side. I'm not sure where everybody is on this call. So maybe there are some people in the Oakland area here. But the net is across the city, no. Close or touching or within residential, I don't think it'll work because we all know the parking will just spill into the neighborhoods and that will then affect our quality of life.
Paul, you want to take a crack at that? I'd be happy to read it to you again.
No, that's okay. I think I have it, Barry. The idea of reducing parking minimums is something that needs to be carefully considered and studied. I say that because it's an issue we wrestled with during my 8 years on the Plan Commission in planned development districts. Many times developers wanted to reduce their parking requirement because they said people use Uber, they come by mass transit, so we don't need as much parking. And on a case-by-case basis, that can be managed. But to do it across the city, there will be unintended consequences. For example, on Lower Greenville, there is close proximity between neighborhoods and the commercial strip, which includes many bars that don't have parking. If we eliminate parking requirements, the number of bars will multiply because they don't have to worry about providing parking for their many patrons. That will just deflect that parking onto the adjoining neighborhood streets and create chaos. We've seen it before we adopted the late night SUP ordinance, and it will multiply if we eliminate all parking requirements. So areas like that definitely need to be exempted from this and keep the parking as the only restriction on the number of bars in these areas. And I would want to look at it on an ad hoc basis rather than an across the board citywide reduction or elimination of the minimum parking requirements.
Mr. Ridley, what changes would you make to the public transportation in our district to make it more viable for people who live and work here?
Well, we have the longest DART light rail system, the longest system in the country. It's an excellent system, but it's a hub and spoke system. It was developed to provide mass transit for commuters to downtown primarily from all different sections of the city. but it doesn't do well in terms of local travel that isn't focused on downtown. Sometimes people have to travel miles out of their way to go downtown just to go out to another sector of the city. What we need is an improved bus system. And the DART Zoom program, they have hired a consultant to review and examine our entire bus system and make recommendations to improve ridership and improve service. And I fully support that effort because we need to have a better, more flexible bus system. Once we do that, then we can also address things like transit-oriented development, about interconnection between the bus system and the light rail system, and also transit options for short distances like the shared ride system and other types of alternative mobility. It has to be a complete network. We have to plan for their interface and not just look at one aspect of it.
And Mr. Blewett, would you like to answer that question? What changes would you make?
Well, Mr. Ridley touched on it. I mean, DART is already looking at doing a revamp of their bus network, and it's all about ridership versus coverage. And into that mix, COVID has thrown us a monkey wrench. I mean, ridership has been down, and it's really hard to have a good answer of what we should do. I'm a believer that we should have more ridership. And I think that if we use it more, we'll appreciate it more, and it'll be easier for us to invest more. Right now, we see people not riding, whether it's the bike, whether it's the buses or the trains, and so it's problematic. But I think we all know the future is coming, and a lot of people argued whether or not we should have a new D2 subway through our district, and I struggled with that because the ridership is down, and we went ahead and we passed it just recently. And the reason we did it is there's a lot of federal money involved, and we're still in the design phase. I found it problematic because where the stations, or where it pops up rather on the east side, was going to be an impediment to connecting CBD to Deep Ellum, to the Arts District, and so on. But I was committed. It was committed to me that we would be addressing the east side, and we'd have a second bite from council to reject it if they didn't fix it. Some people that I respect a lot on public transit have said that it's important that we get underground, and I've struggled with that. And you think 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what's the city going to look like? What I know is we're not going to be building above ground trains and take out neighborhoods. So underground makes sense to me if public transit is in our future, and I was willing to see if we could design it. But from a cost benefit standpoint, I much prefer microbuses. I much prefer, streets that are dedicated to public transit, having lanes dedicated to it, that are more used, more frequent, more reliable. We've got a long way to go. We are way behind. And all I do is think about the next 50 years as I evaluate these things.
Thank you.
Great. And we had a couple of questions from the audience asking what ADUs were. I think both of you touched on them in your last answer. ADUs are accessory dwelling units. Those are the granny flats that people, the garage apartments that people put in their backyards. Which gives us a segue to our next question, which is on housing. David, if you could stick around for this one. Why are the vast majority of LIHTC, that's low income housing tax credits projects, built in Southern Dallas? And why are they all 4% non-competitive instead of the 9% competitive builds? And what will you do, if anything, to make sure that all future low income tax credit projects are built in North Dallas and make it transparent and accountable to the citizens how these are arranged?
Wow, I think Paul wrote that question. LIHTC's tough. It's expensive. Well, take it back. In District 14, the land, like I mentioned earlier, is very expensive. And so by the time you look at the bonuses and the incentives, whether it's LIHTC or anything else, we're just seeing them in other areas. Now, there's a big push to spread it around because, as you correctly note, they are largely down south. We just had one that was in Adam Magoo's district. It was a big one that had a lot of units, and it would have gone a long way. I'll just be candid. I voted against it largely because the councilman in that district said he hadn't done sufficient community outreach. I used to have an office up in that area. I know that area pretty well. I think some of the arguments that people made about it being kind of a higher affluent area that would have been a good ad was not as accurate as it could have been. But I do think there's an argument made that it needs to be spread around. I mean, if you look at the imbalance between property values, economics, south and north of 30, we have a problem because the land south of 30 is largely 45, I'm sorry, people 45% and 15% of the value, 85% of the value is north of 30. And so we are crowded, we are dense, we've got traffic issues, costs, I mentioned supply and demand. The best thing we can do as a reliever is to just to switch things, is to change it up. We need more regular housing, and I'd like to see some multifamily development south of 30. And I'd like to spread around, some of the low income aspects too, because any area that becomes labeled a particular way, it impedes development. It actually restricts our property value growth. I think we have to spread it around. I'll be looking for projects that fit, but at the city level, it's not like I get to pick the project that comes to us. They come to us, and I will be looking to spread it around. Yeah.
Paul, would you like to answer the question that you wrote?
Just to keep the record straight, I did not write this question, but I will attempt to answer it. First of all, the projects that we're talking about, the LIHTC projects, which is low-income housing tax credit financed projects, are going to transform the way that we build affordable housing in Dallas. It will no longer be appropriate to relegate low-income housing just to south of I-30 because federal law now prohibits those kinds of projects. What federal law allows is the use of these tax credits for mixed income housing. In other words, it's not just all 100% affordable housing, it's mixed income, and it has to be built in areas of high opportunity, like the Mid-Park project up at LBJ and Central Expressway. That was a very successful renovation of some old apartments with LIHTC funding. The opportunity, therefore, is to spread that low-income housing into buildings with multiple levels of income in North Dallas. Our district is one that is appropriate for that kind of housing in District 14 because we have a lot of high opportunity areas. By that, I mean places that are close to employment, close to good schools, close to shopping and other facilities, so that we're not relegating the low income to the far reaches of the city, far away from mass transit and other necessary services. So that is simply a matter of federal law. We will have to do that with these projects instead of relegating the poor to living all south of I-30.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. Now, the next question has to do with street racing. What will you do to eradicate street racing from Dallas streets? And Mr. Ridley, you go first.
This has proven to be a very difficult problem for the police to wrestle with, in part because they have a no chase policy. What we need is better intelligence about where the street racing and intersection takeovers are going to occur. These are frequently coordinated on social media. So we need to have people at DPD who monitor the social media to alert the patrol officers to where it's going to happen before it ever happens. Another initiative I would suggest is intersection cameras so that we can detect it as soon as it occurs in intersections that are frequently used for this improper purpose. We also need to revitalize the Traffic Enforcement Division of DPD, which has been relegated to minimal funding for years. We need to strictly enforce the laws against reckless driving and street racing and speeding so that when someone is engaged in this kind of activity, we impound their vehicle and we put them behind bars. That's the only way we're going to deter this kind of conduct. Now, hopefully, some of this, large part of it, I think, is due to the pandemic. People who have no social outlets, who may be unemployed, they're frustrated with conditions, and so this is the result. And when people do get back to work and back to social contact, I think a lot of this will become less less of a problem.
Thank you. Mr. Blewett?
Yeah, obviously I have a bit of an advantage because being on the job the last 2 years, I've been working on this. So I know a few things. Number one, DPD has what's called the Fusion Center, which already tracks online groups as they come in from other areas. We try and pre-position police when we know they're going to meet in a particular area. We try and disrupt them. I say we, DPD. There's a speed racing task force. I've been out with them a couple of times watching how they interact with the racers. I actually had some racers send me an email one time. It was kind of an interesting deal. And I had an exchange with them, talked to them on the phones. I'm like, what do you guys want? I mean, I figured, at the very least, we should have communication with them. And, they want what we can't give them. I mean, they want unfettered access to be able to enjoy this activity. I mean, to them, it's a generational, it's a lot of young people. I mean, I think look around, I don't know anybody, maybe Cannon's the only young guy who probably does it. But the rest of us, the rest of us have outgrown this, so it's an issue. Cameras, it's illegal, red light cameras. So we have pictures that we've used. Cops have gone to people's houses and said, hey guys, we can't use it. It's not enforceable. But we say, we know you were there. Please stop. In terms of impounding cars, in May, City Council, I voted for it. We have new penalties for spectators and for racers that we can actually impound their cars. We can't seize them and keep them because you have to convict them. There's a whole bunch of other problems. But we're already doing that. In Austin right now, they're taking up a new legislative that will allow us to actually hold the cars, to take them off the street. So Austin may help us on this. We'll see. But the net is, this is a major problem nationwide. It's not just Dallas. It's a generational thing. I think Mr. Ridley might be right. I hope he's right, that after COVID normalizes, kids go back to school, people go back to work, that maybe this will become less of an entertainment thing for them. Maybe they'll go to the malls and watch movies again. But right now, this is a cultural phenomena that the Dallas police is doing everything they can. And I'll tell you this, if you get the stats from Chief Garcia, you'll see arrests are way up, cars seized or impounded, guns, drugs taken off the street. They are doing a good job with the tools they have. But even with the ordinances that we passed back in May, racers doubled. They just keep coming.
Thank you, Mr. Blewett.
This is a major problem.
Can I just interject that and remind the audience to please submit your questions to the candidates in the chat. We will be asking audience questions after this segment.
And we're doing very well on time, so it looks like we'll get to a number of the audience questions.
Are we going to have a third partner?
That's up to the third partner, Mr. Blewett. We shall see. So our next question is for you, David, and it's on zoning. Our zoning master plan for Dallas has emphasized the need to focus on density, focus our density increases at transportation hubs so that more people can be housed with access to public transit. Yet anybody who observes the council zoning agendas can see that we give away a lot of zoning that doesn't comport with that plan. And we still lack robust housing and services where Forward Dallas tells us to put them. How do we stop this haphazard approach to land use, and what will you do to make that happen?
I don't know if it's an advantage or disadvantage that I've been involved in this the last couple of years, but City of Dallas is famous for having studies. We keep writing checks for all kinds of things, zoning, public safety, economic development, you name it. And I mean, I'm glad you're not recording this because the reality is we have a handful of people downtown that are.
David, we are recording this.
Oh, dang it. Let's just say some departments are more efficient than others. And some people actually try to implement plans and some people don't. And at the council level, it's a constant struggle to get plans implemented as opposed to funding yet another plan. And we're doing that again. So in terms of why aren't we doing it? It's a complex thing where different council members in different areas have different agendas. And some people really believe that housing affordability, comprehensive housing plan, yet another plan that we are kind of implementing, that says we need 20,000 new units, and yet we haven't done it. We've talked quite a bit about housing around TODs, and yet it's a struggle to do it. It is everywhere you look, we've got plans. You ask why we aren't doing it? Like I said, if you weren't recording it, I might be a little more candid. But city government is trying A lot of people are trying, but it is a constant battle. And without being more critical of some of my compatriots downtown, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Mr. Ridley, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. This is kind of right up my alley as I dealt with very difficult zoning issues in District 14 for 8 years on the Plan Commission. We have very complex zoning laws. I fully support the idea that high density residential and other types of commercial development should be located at transportation nodes so that we can reduce the parking needs of those housing units and also facilitate the use of mass transit. I would propose that we need more implementation and less about the plans that David spoke about. Planning is important, but at some point you have to implement those plans. How do we do that? We do that at the Plan Commission. It's critical that we have a qualified plan commissioner for District 14. Unfortunately, we don't right now. He himself admitted when he was appointed 2 years ago that he had no qualifications for the job. And it's showing in his work. He has just approved 2 very high density developments in the midst of the Oaklawn community where they're away from mass transit. And the other is on Cedar Springs. Without the involvement of the neighborhood, without the approval of the Oaklawn committee, this has never happened before in District 14. This is going to destabilize neighborhoods and lead to severe gentrification. So we need to have qualified appointees, principally on the Plan Commission, and that's something I will rectify.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. The next question also goes to you, and it's a homeless question. With the pandemic and job losses, we are seeing big increases in homelessness in our city. What will you do to help solve this problem?
Well, homelessness has been around forever. It does seem to be getting worse, and the pandemic certainly hasn't helped the situation. There are many homeless camps around the city. The city has been regularly clearing those during the pandemic, and that doesn't solve the problem. It may move it temporarily, but it doesn't solve the basic homelessness causes. There are some things that we need to work on to mitigate the homelessness in our society. One of them is to support the nonprofits that work in this field. Government is not well equipped to deal with individual homeless persons. Yes, there's a homeless solutions department that's been created at City Hall, and that was a good idea. But the nonprofits, like Our Calling, are the agencies that deal with this day in and day out. They know the needs of their patrons. They know that they need certain types of clothing, they need showers, they need shelter in extreme weather, and they're very effective at providing that. The problem is they have limited capacity. So my proposal is to better support those by the city government so that they can expand their impact on the community. We also need to try to prevent people from becoming homeless. When I was earlier in my career, I provided pro bono legal services at the Housing Crisis Center, and that service was critical for people who had interruptions in income. Maybe they missed the rent for 1 or 2 months, and they were about to be evicted. And we advised them about their legal rights under Texas law that prevented them from becoming homeless. We need to expand that effort. And we need to continue the effort of the city to provide temporary supportive housing, particularly in times of extreme weather events like we did in February at the convention center.
That's your time, Mr. Ridley.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Blewett?
Yes, I mean, homelessness has been around for who knows how long, right? It's been around forever. One of the bigger things that I think that we're not doing very well is this whole idea of homeless solutions. I mean, I'm a big believer in semantics, that words matter. And it used to be we looked at people that were on the street as in crisis intervention. We used to look at them as people who might have mental issues, people who might have addiction issues. There are people who are obviously transitional because of economic issues. But the point was we'd identify what it was that caused them to be homeless. And one of my things is, if we gave all of these people a home, would it solve their problem? And quite frankly, a whole bunch of them, it wouldn't, because that's not the issue. It's a symptom. So I'm a big advocate for changing how we look at this. Just going in and cleaning out a homeless encampment doesn't solve the problem. I am a supporter of what we're doing. We mentioned the Right Care program earlier, where we're matching up mental professionals with police professionals, where instead of just arresting somebody, we can actually find out what's going on. I do believe that it is a public-private aspect, that there are private entities that are better at doing this, more efficient. And I also believe that we shouldn't be concentrating them. That's something that we talk a lot, whether it's the LIHTC we just talked about a little while ago. It's the same concept for me. There are churches and agencies throughout the city. We have talked about Salvation Army, for example, opened up over in the West. We've talked about these facilities, spreading it out, getting out of the urban central business district area. And there are people who want to do that. So I support making sure it's not concentrated, public-private, correctly identifying what the underlying problem is and helping those people get the help they need. And then, quite frankly, there's a handful of people, whatever that percentage is, they just actually prefer that lifestyle. And that's a problem that we're going to have to keep on chugging away. We're going to have to keep writing checks, providing services to them, and help them as much as possible. The county is no longer our friend on this. They don't have the facilities or the money to help us. We're doing this on our own. We've tried to get them involved, but we're going to have to keep at it.
Okay, thanks, guys. We have one last question from our official Reform Dallas list, and then we'll go to our audience questions. Just a heads up, Courtney S. and Ross Williams, you will be up when we finish here. This last one's kind of a fun question. David, we'll start with you. What's your favorite Dallas landmark or secluded spot? And specifically, why is this place symbolic or important to you?
You have to ask me different ages. 20, 30 years ago, I'd tell you the docks at White Rock Lake, where I'd go out there and I might have taken a little something to drink with a wife or a girlfriend, and it's kind of a nice secluded place to just enjoy the nature. Today, with 7 kids, I've joked about this before, but it's not really a joke. Anytime my wife and I get a break from the house, that's a secluded, wonderful spot. So it could be a restaurant or it could be a bar. I mean, we really don't go to movie theaters. It just kind of is what it is. I mean, our life is pretty busy. So we catch moments where we can. I think the easiest thing would be, we walk our dog almost every night. It's our little moment. And it's ridiculous. We pick up trash when we're walking, but we do. And so we walk the dog. My dog is not a friendly dog, but we get her out of the house. It's our excuse. And it's a moment of Zen, right? It's a moment where we can talk about our day. It's a moment where we can appreciate, I live pretty close to Teetsy Park. We usually go around the park and some other things. So we're outside, we're in our neighborhood. It's a suburban feel in an urban neighborhood. And it's our moment. Yeah, that's it.
Paul?
Barry, would you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. What's your favorite Dallas landmark or secluded spot? And specifically, why is this place symbolic or important to you?
Well, I would have to say it would be Thanksgiving Square downtown. I worked downtown for most of my career, and amidst the hustle and bustle of the heart of the city, Thanksgiving Square is a place of solitude and contemplation. It's a quiet oasis, a green space in the center of downtown that I would frequently go over at lunchtime to enjoy the quiet and removal from the hustle bustle of the city. And that was important to me in the midst of the hectic business day, to be able to reflect on where I was going, what I was doing. And it provided the perfect environment for doing that. There are plans now to change the square and modernize it. I will reserve judgment on whether that will be good or bad. But for me, it was a very pleasant space to spend a few fleeting moments during the workday.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to our audience questions. This is segment 2, and the first person up is Courtney S. If you'd like to read your question to the candidates.
Sure. I'm continuing to struggle to understand both of your opposition to ADUs. ADUs provide an opportunity for mixed income housing in single family neighborhoods. They provide the opportunity for revenue stream for property owners who are living in areas that have been there for a long time, who are having a difficult time covering increasing property taxes. It seems as though you support mixed income housing when it's in a mid to high rise apartment community where everyone's a renter, but by no means are you okay with the idea of single family, homeowners, primarily in East Dallas, that are terrified at the idea of renters invading their community. I don't, help me understand how this jives together with what you say in one statement or sentence. Thanks.
Who's first?
Paul, why don't you take that one? I think you were last.
All right. Well, the problem with ADUs is they sound good on paper, but there are a lot of unintended consequences that you have to think about. First of all, they can be very expensive. At building costs of $300 a square foot, even building a 700 square foot apartment in your backyard could cost over $200,000. Few homeowners want to burden their existing property with a mortgage in that amount. Fewer still have the cash to pay for it. In terms of providing affordable units, it has just the opposite effect. What it does is, particularly in already affordable neighborhoods like Mount Auburn, it creates pressure for developers to come in, tear down the existing affordable houses, put up much bigger houses, and therefore they can build larger ADUs because their size is limited to a percentage of the main house. The economic incentive is such that it will devastate affordable neighborhoods, displacing the people that currently have low-cost housing, and result in big, expensive new houses with ADUs that cost as much to rent as the old original house would have. It converts our single-family neighborhoods into duplex neighborhoods with the added congestion, parking problems, noise problems that can generate. It also doesn't reduce anybody's taxes or give them revenue to pay their taxes because, particularly for seniors, they already have a senior tax cap once they hit 65. However, if they improve their property with an ADU, then the whole property gets reassessed, reappraised at its current market value, which will greatly escalate their taxes. It may be frozen then again, but it will be at a much higher level. And so they're much better off to simply buy an existing affordable unit in another neighborhood or perhaps their own neighborhood and rent it out so that they don't damage their existing cap on taxes for their existing home. So they are fraught with difficulties.
David, you want to take a crack at that?
I'm supposed to argue with Paul every now and then, but every now and then he gets it right. So,
I feel the same about you, David.
well, thank you. On this one, I don't think there's going to be much separation. The ADUs were going forward, and quite frankly, I put some pressure on things to slow it down because we're working on the short-term rental issue. And for me, I just felt that beyond the cost impediment to building an ADU, we're not getting a lot of demand for them either. It's this idea that people say that we should do it, but there's really just not a lot of demand for them. And when you do, you run the numbers on how much it costs to build versus what you could rent it for. It's just the economics don't work unless you already had the framework of one already back there. But then you get back to the short-term rentals. And to Mr. Redley's point, you could actually de facto turn neighborhoods into duplexes, which does bring about the parking and the congestion. And quite frankly, if they were short-term rentals, you could end up with 2 short-term rentals on one property. Because I think, highest best use of real estate, my big concern would be It may not be worth 300,000 for a back house for your granny, but it might be worth 300,000 as an Airbnb. So I think we have to get the short-term rentals fixed first. The ADU thing, I'm willing to take a look at it, but I see it as very problematic, and I do not think it provides the advantages that some of the proponents say that it does. But I'm willing to be convinced. If you can tell me how it benefits somebody to pay their property taxes because they can have on their owner-occupied front of the house a rental on the back, I am open to that argument. But right now, I don't see it.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Ross Williams. Ross, I believe we've unmuted you. You want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Do you support the change of council meeting start time to the morning instead of the evening?
David, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I support what the people want. COVID has kind of changed that. I know there's a big argument about whether we went mornings or afternoons. I wish we had meetings live. I miss the horseshoe. I miss people down there. I mean, these Zoom calls, you guys are all beautiful. This is great to be here together with you. But live and in person is a much better deal. And if we can do things, even if it's just once a month, that allows people a more accessible point to their government, I completely support that. But for the last year and a half, it just hasn't happened. And I think it was Lee Kleinman that, I forget who it was, that kind of pushed the idea of getting rid of them. And look, it's representative government. If this is what you think is important for you to get off work, to get down there so you can have your voices heard, I completely support it.
Paul, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we should have the greatest access possible to our city council meetings because this is a representative democracy. And I think one of the things we've learned through the pandemic is that we can have very good access to our legislative body through the internet. And it avoids people having to take off time during their day to travel to City Hall, to sit there and wait for their case to come up, and then have to travel back to their jobs. And so I think the time is less critical if we have a hybrid system when we are able to go back to live meetings that people can also attend through Zoom or other video so that they can participate on an efficient basis and not waste a lot of time commuting to and from City Hall. That just improves the access and I think the responsibility of the elected officials to the electorate.
Okay, our next question is from Eddie Morgan. Eddie, I've just asked you to unmute. Go ahead and ask your question if you'd like. Okay, I will read Eddie's question for him. Paul, if you can answer, how will you help keep rental housing affordable?
Well, there are a few ways to do that. If we're talking about new construction, 6 years ago, while serving on the Plan Commission, I initiated the idea of incentive zoning. That is a system by which developers coming to the city to ask for upzoning to increase the density of their projects are requested to give something back to the city in the form of affordable housing units as a percentage of their total number of units. These would be affordable for people at different income levels below the market rate, say at 60 to 80% of median family income. And that keeps a supply of new modern units that are equivalent to the market rate units, but are available at more affordable rental rates. Another way to do it is to preserve our existing affordable housing stock. There are many neighborhoods where there are smaller, less expensive, perhaps older, but usually well-maintained houses, and many of those are available for rent. And so I'm an advocate for providing loans and grants, particularly to seniors and other low-income homeowners to renovate their houses. That also preserves the entire neighborhood and makes a desirable place for affordable rental property.
David?
The first one, and I don't have the hard numbers on this because I think it's just kind of we've hired some people, MuniRev, to calculate how many houses out there have gone to the short-term rental market. But I think it's something we need to be aware of, that a significant number of houses, we don't know, thousands, could be in the short-term rental market as opposed to long-term rentals. That reduces the supply of rentals and it affects then the costs of those that are still existing. So that's something we have to have a better handle on. That short-term rentals have had a negative impact on long-term rental availability and cost. I like the idea of loans and grants to fix up older homes in older neighborhoods. That's something I think that does make sense. We have some programs like that. It's not really real money. It's $5,000, $10,000 to fix a roof and do certain things, and it's been minimally spread around. But at least we have some programs that we are funding. Today, our code director, Carl Simpson, came forward with a program that I think will help, that we've been pushing on for about a year, and it's the rental inspection program. Instead of having all of them get inspected, it's mandatory. These guys go out and they find 10, 15 different items that are wrong with a property. The owners then have to bring them up to a certain level, and then they raise their rents, quite frankly. And in one hand, it sounds like a great thing. You're helping the renters by making sure they're in a standard and a very nice rental, but I've done, there's a cost too. So we're flipping it around now and doing it. If there's a complaint, if it's substandard, we'll go out and inspect it. And I think that will go a long way towards properties that are fine. The air conditioning works, the roof works, but we're not having a landlord put $10,000 into it and actually have to raise the costs. And so I think that's a good way of addressing the problem owners, not all owners. But yeah, we do have a major problem on affordability, and Mr. Ridley and I do differ on his inclusionary zoning. I just think we need thousands of affordable units, and we're putting in 5 and 10 units in these buildings, and it's not making an impact. So we need to do better.
Thank you. So the next question is from our Facebook forum, and I believe, Mr. Blewett, you go first. Although municipal elections are nonpartisan, what political party do you identify with?
People really want this race to be partisan. I mean, it's crazy. And I've voted Republican. I have voted Democrat. And honestly, I hate having to say a party, because if I have to, I mean, I'm not a libertarian. I really am truly an independent. And I know what my opponents are going to say, and that's fine. I mean, but I promised when I ran that I would be scrupulously nonpartisan. And I will lose votes for saying that, because some people want me to say I'm a Republican and some people want me to say I'm a Democrat, and I won't do it. So I apologize. You can look up my voting record. You can see how I voted, and it's balanced on both sides. And yeah, I'm sorry. I promised I would do it, and I'll take the hit from both parties, but I represent everybody fairly, just the way I do it.
Well, we know Jim Schutz at D Magazine will be looking into that. Paul, would you like to take a crack?
It is an easy thing to see.
Mr. Ridley?
Well, I have yet to see a pothole that was a Democratic pothole or a Republican pothole. Most city services should be administered without regard to political party. It's really not relevant to providing city services. Personally, I call myself a progressive. You can also look up my voting record, and I've voted for the same party my entire life. But for purposes of this election, call me a progressive.
I respect that, Paul.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
The next question comes from another progressive, our timekeeper, Aaron Moore. Aaron, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, and this actually comes from David, your answer on affordable housing. I wanted to put the two answers together and have Mr. Ridley respond as well. Is how do you plan to expand affordable housing and development if the city process discourages permits and the NIMBYism is allowed to scuttle a project?
And Paul, I think you're up.
Okay. Well, we've addressed affordable housing from several different angles in this Zoom call. And I think it takes a holistic approach in that there is no one solution to providing affordable housing. We need to, first of all, look at it from the zoning angle. We need to stop destabilizing stable, affordable neighborhoods. We need to invest in infrastructure in those neighborhoods. Once the infrastructure runs down, private investment stops and disinvestment occurs, which means people don't repair their homes anymore. And that means the whole neighborhood goes downhill and eventually gets redeveloped. So we need to keep the infrastructure up. We also need to incentivize developers and create partnerships with private developers and the city. The city can use their land in their land bank from foreclosed properties, vacant lots that are surplus, to create an opportunity for developers to partner and reduce their land acquisition costs so that they can produce more affordable units. We also need to work with developers of projects that are in high opportunity areas to create mixed income housing so that the project doesn't just have luxury high-rise rentals, but also it has below median family income rentals, what I've called inclusionary or incentive zoning. There is still a large potential for that if it is pursued at the City Plan Commission and the City Council. It doesn't work if people don't implement it. So there are many ways that I would approach preservation and construction of new affordable housing.
David?
Yeah, I would bet $1 that Mr. Ridley and I are not that far apart. We both recognize the need, and we might differ on the paths to get there, but I think it's going to take multiple paths. We're in the process of doing public-private partnerships, setting up corporations so that we can actually give a vehicle so that private entities who want to play in certain spaces, and there are a handful of developers that want to play a role in this. And Mr. Ridley, you might have, I'm not sure. I got to speak at the groundbreaking for the Galbraith. Were you on CPC when it came through? For Jack Matthews?
Yes.
Anyway, okay. Anyway, they got federal, county, they got all kinds of grant money. And Jack is a real interesting guy. He's the kind of guy that would say, hey, if we could figure out how to do a multifamily at 50% at a certain economic band, he'd be all in. The Galbraith, I believe, I have to go back and study it, was 50% workforce housing next to TOD, downtown. It's a real success. It's under construction right now. We need more success stories like that. We don't need 5 and 10 units. We need 50 and 100 and 200 units. That's on the multifamily side. But we all know that the gentrification is occurring throughout the city. You know, you talk to Omar Narvez on the west side. You talk to Basil Dua, just the near southeast. This is not just District 14. Young people with money want to live in the urban core, and they are buying up everything. And it is pricing, you know, it's changing the demographics. Even in my own neighborhood, it's changing fast. My first house was a $200,000 house. And there are starter homes now that are over $1 million. That is changing the demographics of our district. Now, it just is, right? You can't stop that demand if they want to live here. But we have to be very serious about it because we can't be a city of all $1 million houses. We need people, and you talk about the service industry on Greenville Avenue, people who make a living wage, a working wage, are concerned about where they're going to live. And if we price them out to where they have to commute in from half an hour or an hour away, they won't do it. They'll go get jobs in other areas because it's more convenient. So it serves our own interest to have affordable workforce housing for the people who have those kind of jobs that are going to work here in the city in our own district. So we've got to be more serious about it. We've got to try a variety of tactics. And I got $1 says that Mr. Ridley and I are not going to disagree on any of them if they work.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And Cannon Brown, this question is from you. Cannon, because I know and love you, I'm going to remind you to keep the question brief because we are running a little short of time. So go ahead, Cannon, if you'd like to read your question. And Mr. Blewett, if you'd take the first crack.
Sure. It's pretty obvious we aren't going to arrest/police our way out of street racing stunt shows. So why isn't anyone talking about the seemingly obvious solution of creating a space for those interested in engaging these activities? Liability issues often get thrown up as a reason, but don't the risks of this taking place on city streets outweigh the potential liability of creating a space intended for this activity?
Well, I bet you there's a lawyer or two on this call that could answer this from a liability perspective, but I smile. I told you I talked to some of these sliders, street racers, and they said the same thing. They just want a place to be able to do it. And I'll be honest, I did run it past the city attorney's office to see if there's any way the city attorneys would sign off on it. And I think any lawyer on this call knows exactly what the city attorney's office said. So yes, there are liability issues. Now, I was told that there was a warehouse, I believe it was in West Dallas, that was kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that they were doing it. And then it was discovered and shut down. So I'm not advocating for that, because if the city knows about it, we're going to have to enforce it, because it's just the liability. It's the way that it is. I like the idea conceptually. There's a second part of it, though. There are places they can do it outside the city, and they're just not using it. The reality is it's more fun for them to come downtown. It's more fun for the noise to echo off the high rises downtown. They actually like when the cops come in and bust them up. They have a plan. It's like I said, we have a fusion center. They track the cops. It's cat and mouse. They have an intersection they take over. The cops come in and they break up. They block the cops. They separate, like they just separate. And then they reorganize and come over to another intersection. It's an evening's entertainment. It's a plan. And so we are in the middle of a strategic chess game with these guys. They're better drivers in a lot of cases than our cops. They actually want to be chased. So we're not going down that path. I've talked about it. I've talked about bringing in the public safety guys, the state troopers, but and they chase. But any option you look at is problematic, other than we just got to keep pecking away at it. Just keep on keeping on, keep arresting, keep writing tickets. Eventually, we're going to get our streets back. But the idea that they're just going to go do this in some other place because we offer it to them, I'm sorry to report, I don't see that as an option.
Paul, you want to take a crack at the Thunderdome question?
Sure. Well, I am a lawyer and I know a few things about liability. And I will tell you, there aren't many, if any, responsible private property owners who will turn their property over to street racers, because if someone gets injured and this is an inherently reckless and dangerous sport, then they're going to sue the landowner. And that's with no income to compensate them for the risk. No landowner is going to be willing to do that, nor should the city do that, because they would also be subject to suit. If you've seen videos, as I have, of this activity, they're doing donuts around a crowd of spectators in the center of the intersection. I mean, this is suicidal. And that's why the city took to ticketing those people who are participating as spectators. You'd think they were innocent parties, but no, they're participating in it and they're causing some of the risk. That is not something that should be condoned by the city on its property or on any private property. They are using efforts such as they are downtown of reducing the lane widths with coning in the evenings when the street racing happens, putting up barricades, and that seems to have had some success. And once again, I think some of this will go away when people are back in school and back at work. And I'm hoping that this is a temporary problem.
Gentlemen, I see that we have just about 3 minutes left, and I just noticed that Pam Gerber has her hand up. Pam, I don't know if you have a question you'd like to ask. If you do, and you can keep it really quick, we'll let each of these guys take a minute to respond, or we can just move on.
That's very generous of you. Thank you. I will ask a very quick question, but it might require a longer answer. I just wanted to get your thoughts on talking about rent a lot, two issues around rent. One of them is non-present landlords of bed and breakfast, not bed and breakfast, help me, B&Bs.
Airbnbs.
Yes, Airbnbs. And then the other one, because I have one across the alley from me and there's no accountability because the landlord lives in Russia. And then the other one is I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts about the mixed use development on Cedar Springs.
And I think, Paul, you're up, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, this is really two questions as I see it. One of them is the STR question about whether we should allow short-term rentals in our single-family neighborhoods. I'm against that. I think that needs to be seriously regulated. just for the reason you cited. When we have absentee owners and they rent to people for the weekend to take over the entire house, there's no control over activity that goes on there. That's what's generated a lot of the party houses in Dallas, particularly in East Dallas, that get out of control. The police can't do anything about it, but they disrupt the entire neighborhood. So that is something that we need to seriously regulate. With regard to the project on Cedar Springs, I assume that you mean the Avalon high-rise development. That is problematic because they thumbed their nose at the Oaklawn Committee, refused to go before the committee for review, and unfortunately, our city plan commissioner didn't make them do that. When I was on the plan commission, if someone didn't want to go to the Oaklawn Committee, they were going to twist in the wind until they agreed to go and have the review of the neighborhood. The Oaklawn Committee is the guardian of the Oaklawn Plan. They've been in existence for over 40 years. They're very experienced, mature individuals who know how to evaluate zoning cases. They were instrumental in my view of a lot of projects in Oaklawn because I attended their meetings for 8 years that I was on the Plan Commission. I felt they were that valuable. And for a developer to thumb their nose at them and refuse to go before them and then go to the Plan Commission and get their plan approved will just prevent any other developer from wanting to go to the Oaklawn Committee, because the guy at the Plan Commission will greenlight their project without that kind of review. That is wrong, and I will change that.
Great. David, do you want to take it?
Yeah, the question on non-owner occupied or investor Airbnbs, we've been working on that for a year. And I think everybody on this call recognizes the party houses are the main problem. But I think we all also understand that when you get one of them on a street or a block, what will happen is it can actually ruin a block. I mean, and we've had plenty of examples of that where an absentee owner just doesn't care. So we are trying to regulate that. Just recently, we've added zoning restrictions to those regulations. It's going to take us probably 6 months or a year to tighten up where we are on it. But most likely, there's not going to be a way to have properly regulated in single family neighborhoods. So we will be tightening that up on the zoning side in 6 months, 12 months. In reference to the Cedar Springs Avalon Pegasus project, that's in District 2. And I have talked to Medrano about it. I believe the plan commissioner over there is Joanna Hampton. Is that right? I think it is. Anyway, I'm not sure what her position is on this. But I agree. I mean, I think that more work should have been done by Joanna. I don't know. Medrano, I think, is a supporter of it. I have seen it. I've walked the project. And we've talked about this before. I do think it's problematic to set the precedent of going around the Oaklawn Committee. And so if you're streaming this to a large enough audience, the developers that are watching right now, they need to know that the Oaklawn Committee plays a valuable role in managing PD 193, in managing the new development that's coming in. I support them, and I've told them very clearly, I expect them to be a partner of mine so that we can tighten up deals before it gets to city staff. So that's the Avalon project. And I've been pretty clear on short-term rentals tonight.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you both for participating. That concludes the District 14 Candidate Forum for Reform Dallas. This recording will be available on reformdallas.io, where we also have a comprehensive election guide with resources on all candidates and campaign finance. We would like to thank the candidates, audience, and members of Reform Dallas for participating tonight, especially our volunteers, Micah Moore, Soraya Santos, Millie Domenech, Bruce Richardson, and Aaron Moore, who have gone above and beyond to make this happen. A lot of work happens behind the scenes. We couldn't do this without them.